You know, when you dive into the prophetic books of the Bible, it can feel, well, a little intense, like a maze of warnings and judgments. But what if I told you they're not just separate warnings at all, but actually chapters in one single epic story? A story that unfolds like a grand cosmic trial, filled with justice, jaw-dropping mercy, and an incredible promise for the future. Today, we're going to piece that whole narrative together. I mean, really think about it for a second. What if God put the entire world on trial? It sounds like something out of a Hollywood blockbuster, right? But believe it or not, according to the prophet Micah, this is exactly the picture God paints to show us just how serious things are. So in this cosmic lawsuit, God isn't just some angry figure handing out random punishments. No, he's both the one bringing the case, the plaintiff, and the judge making sure the process is fair. The prophet? He's like the prosecutor, laying out all the charges. And the jury? Get this, it's all of creation. The mountains, the hills, everything. It's this powerful way of saying that the evidence is so obvious that even nature itself can see it. Okay, so our journey through this whole divine drama is going to unfold in 4 main acts. First, we'll look at the specific charges in the indictment. Then, we'll see the consequences in the verdict. After that comes a huge plot twist with the surprise witness, and it all leads up to the grand finale, the restoration plan. All right, let's dive into Act 1, the indictment. Before any judgment comes down, the prosecutor, that's the prophet, remember, steps up to read out the charges. And we're not talking about vague complaints here. These are specific, and honestly, they're pretty troubling. And wow, the case file is thick. It kicks off with corrupt leadership. We're talking officials and priests treating their sacred jobs like a side hustle just to make a quick buck by exploiting the very people they were supposed to serve. And of course, that corruption just bled out into the rest of society, right? You had social injustice everywhere, greed, violence, the powerful just snatching land from the weak. The religion, totally hollow, all for show. And this wasn't just an internal problem, the charges go international, pointing fingers at nations like Edom, who were just shockingly cruel, cheering when their neighbors fell, and even hunting down refugees trying to escape. You know, this kind of hypocrisy is exactly what the prophet Amos was talking about. They'd make a big public show of their faith, bragging about their free will offerings. But behind the scenes, those offerings were leavened, a biblical symbol for sin and corruption. It was all a performance, a religion that looked good on the outside but was rotten to the core. It really makes you stop and think, doesn't it? About the face we show the world versus who we are when no one's looking. So after hearing all those charges, we get to Act 2, the verdict. And God's response isn't just a fit of rage. It's precision. It's this careful, measured justice based on a perfect standard. So the prophet Amos has this really powerful vision. He sees a plumb line. You know, that simple tool a builder uses to make sure a wall is perfectly straight? Well, the metaphor is crystal clear. God's standard of justice is just like that. It's exact. It's perfect. You can't bend it. You can't argue with it. And just like a crooked wall is eventually going to come crashing down, a society that's not aligned with God's justice, well, it's headed for collapse. And this whole plumb line thing doesn't just pop up out of nowhere. It's actually part of a sequence. In Amos's first 2 visions, one with a swarm of locusts and another with a raging fire, he pleads with God for mercy. And God actually listens. He holds back. But then comes the plumb line. The standard is set. Judgment is locked in. And the visions after that just confirm it. A basket of summer fruit showing that judgment is ripe and it's coming fast. And finally, the Lord himself standing at the altar, basically saying, it's over. Judgment is now unavoidable. You can really see the progression here, from incredible patience to an inevitable final consequence. Okay, but here's something that's absolutely crucial to get. Not all judgment is the same. For hostile nations like Edom, yeah, the verdict was total destruction, game over. But for God's own people, the whole point was different. Think of it more like a disciplinary cleansing. The goal wasn't to wipe them out. It was more like surgery, to cut out the corruption, save a faithful few, and actually guide them toward a restored future. It was about correction, not annihilation. Big difference. And just when it feels like the verdict is in and the case is closed, the story takes this incredible turn. Act 3 brings in a surprise witness who reveals what God really wants. And spoiler alert, it's not judgment, it's mercy. And this, of course, brings us to the famous story of Jonah. God tells him, hey, go preach to Nineveh. That's the capital of Assyria, basically Israel's worst nightmare, their most hated enemy. And what does Jonah do? He literally runs away, gets on a boat, headed in the complete opposite direction. Of course, you know the story. God gets his attention with a huge storm and a giant fish. And after that, let's call it a dramatic timeout. A much more humble Jonah finally goes to Nineveh. He preaches probably the shortest sermon in history. And then the impossible happens. The entire city actually repents. And listen, this wasn't just some tiny little town. We are talking about a population of over 120,000 people. This is the capital of a brutal, violent empire. And everyone, from the king on his throne all the way down to the regular folks, they all turned back to God. I mean, the sheer scale of that mercy is just staggering. It shows you how huge God's compassion is, even for people we might think are our worst enemies. So the story of Jonah really pulls back the curtain on who God is at his core. It shows us that all those warnings of judgment, they aren't just angry threats. They're actually invitations. They're invitations wrapped in mercy. I mean, what's the whole point of a warning? It's to give people a chance to turn around, so the disaster doesn't have to happen at all. It's not a threat. It's a lifeline. And all of this leads us to the final act, the grand finale of this whole cosmic drama. After the indictment, the verdict, and that stunning surprise of mercy, God finally unveils his long-term solution, the restoration plan. And this plan is the total opposite of how things were before. Remember all those charges against the corrupt leaders, the ones who used people for profit and built their societies on bloodshed? Well, God's plan is to just replace them completely. He promises a new righteous king, one who won't exploit people, but will shepherd them. A king who won't build on violence, but will establish a kingdom of real, lasting peace. And the prophets, man, they paint such a vivid picture of what this coming kingdom will look like. Micah tells us it's going to be led by a victorious king coming from the tiny, unexpected town of Bethlehem. It'll be a kingdom built on eternal peace, where that faithful remnant who made it through the cleansing can finally thrive and grow. And at the very center of it all, true worship. All the fake hollow religion, all the idols, shattered, gone for good. This is the amazing, hopeful ending the entire story has been building towards. So as we've seen, this whole four-act drama, from a cosmic courtroom all the way to a coming kingdom, reveals this timeless story of justice, mercy, and incredible hope. And it leaves us with a huge question to chew on. If we know that this is the promised end of the story, total restoration under a perfect king, how does that change how we live our lives right now, in the messy, complicated middle of it all?